This is an interview with Mr. John Lavecchia from Newark, New Jersey. He kindly volunteered to sit down with interviewer Paige Samuelson to talk about the Cold War.
Well, the Cold War was a, a conflict between communism, led by Russia, and the Western world, including the United States. And it was an economic conflict, at least to me. And for a while, at least at my age, then, which certainly was in college years, and we were concerned that we were losing it because a number of countries were teetering on going. I can remember the French and the Italians having very active communist parties which never quite got control, but were threatening to get control. And elsewhere in Russia and the former states that had been in the Soviet Union, they were all communist, and obviously Southeast Asia was heading toward communism and turning communist. I think that's what I recall on the subject of the Cold War. I forget when the Russians first developed a nuclear bomb, but it was probably 50 or in the early 50s. And yeah, sure, we were concerned about it, and I think, we obviously were worried that there might be a nuclear war. And interestingly, I've read a book recently that, and the author's, who's a very smart guy, his view is, well, we've grown so accustomed to people having nuclear weapons and the fact that we could destroy the entire world that nobody's going to start one. And that's his thesis. And he looks back and says, well, look, nobody started one. But there's among other things, there's a worry that some rogue government or group would somehow get their hands on one and at least drop one. And they're so powerful at this point, I don't think we understand how bad one could be. When I got out of high school in '50, we had air raid drills earlier than that, during the Second World War. And I remember that Emmy's father was, an air raid warden, and we had gas street lamps. And he would have to come around when we were having an air raid drill and turn off each individual street light. I remember, drills where we got under desks. People were building bomb shelters near where we lived. But I never thought that my family needed one. And I just kind of said, again, that the bomb shelters are a bit of an overreaction. A huge part in everybody's thinking is that the United States has never been affected by a war since the Civil War, other than perhaps an incursion in the Mexican War somewhere in the Southwest. But so we have no background. We never were bombed. We never were invaded. So at least I think for my friends of my generation, that wasn't a major concern at bomb I certainly thought Eisenhower was a great president, and I think, probably going back, I think he was great, and I think at the time we almost overvalued him. We just thought he was, so terrific that that he could almost, do no wrong. And certainly, we had the radio, which, we would all sit and listen to on Sunday night for sure, but we didn't have anything remotely close to the news that you folks have now. And so I don't think we concentrated on it as much. We would touch it from time to time, and we would hear it, and obviously there were even more newspapers than there are now and magazines. But it wasn't at you all the time the way I think the current news is. I mean, I think we have news channels and things just, aching to find more news to fill up the time than they're on the air. Everything is breaking news, even though it isn't. Yeah. Certainly, I remember listening to news reports. I remember the Korean War was in 1950, and Emmy, my wife's brother, was in that and was a Marine and was activated right after we all got out of high school. He and I were classmates, and his unit of the reserves was called up, and they were up at the reservoir, the Chosin Reservoir, when the Chinese came in and just overwhelmed them. And that was, a legendary, awful battle. But I certainly remembered tracking what was going on in Southeast Asia and what was going on in Europe. It was there was just this concern that we were going to lose, and then we ultimately, I think, bankrupted Russia, and they had to, give up, and I think it was Gorbachev who I think is maybe still alive, and I think he was the one who, in essence, quit the Cold War, and as I remember, took down the Berlin Wall at that time. Yeah, so communism again was my contemporaries at the time were we thought it was a bad system. We thought it wasn't going to work. We certainly thought it wouldn't work for the United States, and we were quite happy. So we thought that our system was really doing very well, and it was, because we had this enormous need, and we had the factories left over from the war to make all this stuff. So we were acquiring things that either we'd never had before or we hadn't had, since the war started. We were worried about communism. Politically, there were people who were worried about communists being involved in our government, Joe McCarthy in particular. But I didn't ever feel that was a real threat. I didn't think that the communists, were ever going to take over our government or try and take us down from the inside. I remember the Berlin Wall coming down. And that's it's my memory that sort of ended the scare of the Cold War, because essentially Russia had quit and wasn't pressing it at that point. I guess to make our own government, democracy, better and more responsive to what the different elements in our country are interested in, so that we don't have to worry about something taking us down. So I guess that my answer would be to keep trying to do something better, to keep trying to improve how we meet the needs of our population in general and all around the country, so that we're not subject to anything coming and overwhelming us, either economically or militarily. I think we've done a better job since then. I think it's been uneven, and depending on who you are, where you are in the country, what group you're part of, people may think, that we haven't. In general, I think that we have done a better job. But now but I think that by and large, we've done a good job, as I think most people try to do a good job, and try to help with whatever's going on and whatever they're doing, and I think that's a huge strength that we have. But essentially, I think most people, work hard and try to be useful and do things. I don't associate a kind of music with the Cold War. We went to the Burr and Burton dress rehearsal last night for their show, which is wonderful, and that music was mostly from before the Cold War. It was mostly wartime music, 40s, and so I don't think during the Cold War I was a fan of Dixieland, but I don't know that it had anything to do with the Cold War. But Dixieland was a big thing in those years, and when I was in college, which was in the 50s, and we loved Dixieland, and it was accessible, and so that's what I associate with that time period. And since then, I don't get a lot of the music, of the recent music, although Noah plays he plays the trombone, I think, our grandson, yeah. So I'm not very musical. I love listening to music, but it's not related to the Cold War. Certainly at the end of the Second World War in 1946. And I was, for whatever reason, I kept almost a diary, a notebook about the Second World War, because I was old enough to be well aware of what was going on and kept track of the news events. And now feed me that question again.
What was the first time you remember hearing about the Soviet Union and
Yeah.
its conflict?
I think it was as the war was ending, they were our allies, and they were a huge part in in winning the war. They took a toll on Germany in particular, and indirectly on Italy. But so as the war ended, they were increasingly trying to occupy more territory, and I can remember that the Russian army was trying to take over more of Germany, and so it was at that point, right at the end of the war, that I think we became aware of the fact that they had interests that were divergent from ours, and and Roosevelt was getting weaker, and the Russians were pushing harder at the conferences and so on, and were they had their own aims, and we started to diverge from being unified with them. So right around that time, 46. Yeah.
What aspects of the space race do you remember, and what did it mean to you?
Yeah, it was something that I at least didn't understand, and most of my contemporaries didn't have knowledge of how we were making this happen. But it was, hugely upbeat, and there was concern that, the Russians would accomplish first and do more than we were doing. But, and my memory is no one thought of curtailing what we were doing for economic reasons. I mean, it seems to me it didn't occur to the population in general that, are we spending too much money? There couldn't be too much money. And so my main reaction, memory is that it was just exhilarating. And I don't remember so much the concern that we might be in second place. The Berlin Wall. Oh yeah, it was a very, it was very upbeat and exhilarating, and it was a big deal, and it was kind of, the end of an era, I think, and a significant change. Yes. As I said, I think Mr. Gorbachev may still be alive, who was the Russian premier at that time. Yeah.
Do you remember when Ronald Reagan was speaking to Mr. Gorbachev about taking down the wall?
Yes, sure. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, I think were the words. Oh yeah,
Do you think that had an impact in actually taking down the wall? Or?
I think I'll answer that by saying I think he took the wall down and quit, the conflict because they couldn't afford it, because they had been, economically beaten. I think that's, but it seems to me that the two of them got along fairly well, but I may have a faulty memory on that. But I think there were times, I think they met, and I think that, I won't say it's like our current president's love affairs with a number of leaders, but I think they got along fairly well.
Were you ever afraid of nuclear weapons?
Sure, in one sense, we all realized that their destructive power and the fact that others had them, and yeah, I guess at the time, sure, it would mean something had gone, terribly wrong, and it was a genuine concern or worry. As I think I've said before, we've kind of come to, we don't fear them as much because we think today they're so incredibly destructive that no one would deliberately, go there. But I'm sure, when different countries first had them, I can remember worrying about Pakistan having one, and Pakistan being unstable and worried, and I can remember thinking, oh, how did we let that one happen? But I think whether we become numb or not, the fear has dissipated, despite realizing it could end the world. I think it's, less of a current at the top of your head concern. I guess the closest was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah. And incidentally, I'm horning in on Jerry Cars. He was a Marine fighter pilot at the time before he was an astronaut, and he was flying sorties back when literally they turned the vessels around to not deliver the missiles to Cuba. Yeah, I think that was for me, that was the single most concerning time about nuclear war. Yeah, because I was never in military service other than for 6 months later on in my life after we were married and after I was out of law school. I kind of didn't, I don't measure time periods, so much by the war or military service. I kind of, go on, gee, when some kids were born and what we were doing and what my work was like at the time and things like that. But I guess it's good to get a different, reaction from people who were, very much involved. We weren't all being drafted at the time, and I joined the NROTC, the Naval Reserve, and was accepted in college. Every school had reserve programs then. to be in the Naval Reserve. And then absurdly, I failed a physical for some silly reason. And you know, since it was such a great deal and they were going to pay your way through college, they could be very selective, and they were. And so I never had, if I'd done that, I would have been in the Navy for 2 or 3 years after I finished college. So I skipped that one. On the other hand, had to pay to go to school.